Hi, I'm Representative Kim Fawcett, and you're joining me today for an episode of Our Town. About 8 years ago, when I got more involved in Fairfield, I started to meet really extraordinary people, not just our elected officials, but people who work for the town or work behind the scenes at nonprofits and really make the town of Fairfield the extraordinary place that it is. So my mission in creating Our Town is to share those people and what's going on behind the scenes with you, so you get to know them a little better and really get to see the extraordinary work they're doing. Today, I'm really honored to have two guests. I have Sergeant Ed Weihe, and we practiced that and I still butchered it, and Officer Lance Newkirchen.
Perfect.
And I got that one right, and I didn't practice that one. And they are actually members of the Fairfield Police Department, but also leading up a really special new crisis intervention team that we're going to talk about today. Before we get going about the crisis intervention team, gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I'm really very pleased that you're taking time away from your work in town. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about who you are and how you came to the town, because as we talked before, it's a pretty extraordinary police force that we have, and pretty tough requirements to get hired. And I just wanted you to share a little bit where you came from and why you decided to be a police officer. How did Fairfield get so lucky to get you?
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for having us on the show.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. I was born and raised in the Bronx.
Okay.
I moved to Fairfield about 14 years ago, and I was always interested in police work, and I really liked this town. I started out as a school teacher in New York, and I was commuting for 5 years.
Oh, we should talk trains, because that's my other interest
I
area.
was driving, so I was in the rush hour traffic.
Oh, sorry.
So I really did like this town, and it would have been very convenient. I live in town to work in town. So I took the test, and I became a Fairfield police officer 10 years ago.
Okay.
So this is my 10th year. I've been a sergeant for 2 years. And this last year, I took on the hostage negotiation team supervisor and the crisis intervention team supervisor.
Wow, okay. All right. And what kind of education does it take before you apply to be a police officer?
You need at least an associate's degree.
Okay.
I have my bachelor's degree in music.
Yes, I heard that, and that's pretty. So you're going to lead the Fairfield Police rock band?
It has happened. That's a reality. Currently on hiatus.
I want to come, by the way. I want to come see.
We'll keep you posted. We have a Facebook page and everything.
Oh, for real?
We do.
We'll publicize that at the end.
Great. So the application process is a little bit difficult. It starts with everybody applies. We typically have somewhere around 200 applicants.
Oh, okay.
And depending on the circumstances, they may be competing for anywhere from 10 to as little as 1 spot.
Wow. And that's once a year we hire?
There was a run where they were doing it every 2 years. We actually haven't given a test in a while. We're fully staffed right now. And you take a written test. If you pass the written test, you move on to a physical test. If you pass the physical test, you take an oral board. If you pass the average of all 3 of those tests, you move on to a very long psychological evaluation, an in-depth background check, polygraph, and then you get offered.
We're not light on you. It's tough to get hired here.
It's true. And you get offered a conditional job initially, and you go for an interview in front of the Board of Commissioners. And once you get through that interview, that's when you find out whether or not you have been hired.
Well, we're very lucky that you made it through such a long, arduous process.
I feel lucky.
And Officer Newkirchen.
Perfect.
I know that you came a little bit differently into police work, I think, from a business career.
I had a kind of a different route.
Okay.
I actually went to the police academy when I was 42.
Oh, wow.
I am now 47, so I was competing with people half my age, just back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and all in excellent condition. So I certainly had.
You had to whip into shape.
I had a little bit of a taller order to fill, but I grew up in Wilton,
okay.
and I went to Tufts University. I majored in economics. And after that, I worked in publishing for a while. I worked with Norman Lear, who's the creator of All in the Family. He started a publishing company right out of college. I did that. And then I went and worked at Olivia Mather Advertising, which is the 8th largest ad agency in the world. And then I moved on to a market research company called Information Resources. And our major competitor at the time was AC Nielsen. And I was there for about 16 years. And I was a vice president in account management and client service. So I was there for about 17 years.
totally different career.
Totally different career, and a lot of people said, well, what did you have, a midlife crisis and just wake up one day and decide you want to become a police officer? I actually, in high school, was a member of the Wilton Volunteer Ambulance Corps.
Okay.
So I responded to about 400 to 500 EMS calls from being a senior in high school all the way through college, and that was all volunteer. So I really had a taste of working with the community back then. And after being in the corporate world for over 20 years, I realized that I really kind of missed that aspect of interaction and helping people. Mm-hmm. And I really harkened back to the days of when I was on the ambulance corps. So I decided to take the test as well. And I've actually spoken a little bit about what it takes to get hired, and I've written a couple of articles on it, and Sergeant Weihe is dead on. There's typically about 200 people that actually kind of make it into the position where they're ready to start to apply, but there's been studies done that say that, you know, there's upwards of 700 to 800 people that are really overall interested in the position but don't turn in their application, so we're not really able to track them. So typically Fairfield hires less than 0.5% to get the job, and I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions in town. I think typically how police are portrayed in the movies is, oh, if you had an uncle who's on the force, it's easy to get hired. I mean, it is literally next to impossible, and I'm not saying that to make us feel good, it's just the reality, because a lot of people do ask us, what does it take? Well, I'm thinking about becoming a police officer, and you know, Sergeant Weihe had mentioned a lot of the steps. You know, there's also a hearing and the eye test and the credit check, and they go and talk to your 5th grade teacher, and how did you treat your classmates back then? I mean, it's really a process where they look not to hire you because there's just so many people.
Right, they really have to weed you out.
Yeah, so I think that you know, that the Fairfield Police Department has a lot of very smart, bright, you know, individuals, and I think a lot of times, unfortunately, the public doesn't see that.
Yeah. No, I hope that that's not the case, because I have run across some extraordinary
that's good
people. So. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask, you know, was it a hard transition to leave sort of corporate life? It sounds like you moved up the corporate ladder substantially, and so financially, and also just the respect that you must have earned at your previous job to come in and be sort of low man on the totem pole. Right. Well, how was that shift at 42 years old?
The best way to describe it is, and I get that question actually a lot. So a lot of people in the corporate world, and also people in town that I meet, that ask me, oh, what's your background? And they can't believe that I did this at age 42. I think the best way to describe it is a week before I went to the police academy, I was literally at a cocktail party with Beyonce and Andy McDowell and Ava Longoria. I consulted for L'Oreal, and they were all spokeswomen for L'Oreal. And they had a giant cocktail party in New York City. And so I was there, and I got to walk the red carpet and, you know, kind of hobnob with celebrities, and literally a week later, I was in a bunk bed with a mattress this thin, shut off from my family in the world, with people half my age, you know, giving the old guy a hard time.
What am I doing?
Talk about a completely different world. But so that's probably the best way to think about it. Literally in a couple of days, I did that transition. But the Fairfield Police Department, the administration, and the fellow officers are extremely supportive. And it's like anything in life. If you really want to do it that badly and you're focused, you can really make anything happen. So that's kind of the
That's a really, really nice story. And I can tell just from meeting you that you're very content and at peace with your decision. So it must have been the right direction for you.
No, it was. It was. Very happy.
Well, I invited you all here today because you have spearheaded a pretty special program here in town. It's called the Crisis Intervention Team.
Yes.
And it's a special team within the Fairfield Police Department that's really focused on serving a certain population. I think I'm going to let you describe it a little bit first rather than me sort of faking it.
Sure.
So, so tell us about the Crisis Intervention Team. What is it?
Well, if you want to talk about police in general, police work, patrol work in general, every officer is trained to respond and resolve to variety of situations. Everybody gets the same training. But there are situations that require a specialist. You have sexual assault cases, you have burglary cases. We have a detective bureau for that. It requires people with a little more training, a little more expertise in specific areas. We have a SWAT team, hostage negotiation team. We have a dive team. So it's a very diverse department with a lot of special areas. And that brings us to CIT, which is Crisis Intervention Team. And the Crisis Intervention Team, they are trained specialists in dealing with specifically mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And the reason why that's important is because a person suffering from mental health issues is so much more likely to come into contact with the police. The reason being they display behaviors, they display symptoms that get noticed either by the police or by a concerned citizen.
Right.
And this can be anywhere from an alcoholic who is wandering in the street confused and a passerby calls and says, I see a person who may need some help. It can also be a lot more severe. Bipolar person not taking their medication is having a violent outburst or taking their clothes off in public. And even as serious as someone in crisis who is waving a large knife at passing motorists in the street, and I believe that was actually one of your calls. So the idea is that you have these officers who are trained to recognize and respond to specifically these situations. And that's important because that training dictates the responding officer's approach to the situation, their engagement of and interaction with that individual. And if they can recognize that these are symptoms of mental illness, you're going to have a much more appropriate resolution to the incident.
So, Officer Newkirchen, I'll let you expound a little bit about on the training that's required for a police officer in Fairfield to join your team.
Right.
'Cause it's pretty extensive.
It is pretty extensive, and there's actually, believe it or not, a pretty strict screening process within the police department. There's about 7 or 8 criteria that you have to meet before you can even apply internally for it. But we went to Silver Hill Hospital for a full week. 8 hours a day, intensive training by psychiatrists, psychologists, police officers, mental health professionals. And the book, I actually have it in my car, is probably 2 phone books that thick. And every page is it's a single spaced, small type, and it is a very extremely intensive training. So you do that within the 40-hour week. Then after that, you have to kind of hone your skills in the field, and we debrief all the time. So it's an ongoing learning process. In addition to that, we are required to go to follow-up trainings, whether it be with autism or with suicide. And Sergeant Weihe brought up a really interesting point about some of the more obvious cases, and the majority of the cases we go to, bipolar, schizophrenia, waving a knife in the air. But we were talking the other day, we're seeing an entirely new crop of people in crisis, and those are a mother who's getting divorced, who suddenly has 2 kids, and the husband says, I'm not going to let you drive the family car, and she is finding that she now has to turn, either to drinking or, erratic behavior. We have a lot of people that later in life are experiencing deep crisis, and it's triggering emotional issues because of the economy. In 2008,
yeah, I was just going to say, what happened with the past 3 years?
We are seeing such a huge uptick. I mean, there's individuals who are very fortunate and live in a very nice part of town, Greenfield Hill or Southport, and for the first time ever, they're forced to be on a budget. And people are going to laugh watching this, but it is really true. People can say, oh, what was me? You can't drive the Jaguar every day. But for people who are used to an accustomed lifestyle and now they've been thrown a curveball, if there's any underlying psychosis going on, that's not going to come to the top. Yeah. So we're seeing a lot of that in Fairfield, because in a weird way, it's such a privileged town. And the other thing is that we're seeing better and more faster and more sophisticated diagnostic techniques. So individuals who are suffering with autism, it's a little easier to diagnose now. Individuals who have some underlying, mental illness, it's easier to diagnose now because of the advancements. And then there's the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of vets coming back into town, and we've encountered a lot of them.
Really?
Yep. Yes. It has a very big vet population that we're finding.
And so one of the questions I had for you was, originally, not all towns have a specialized team like this. This is sort of special to Fairfield. And I was wondering sort of how you saw the need came to the surface, and how you originally decided amongst you internally that you needed or wanted to have a team like this.
CIT has been a growing trend in law enforcement across the country. And it was about 2 years ago that our chief started researching, how do I get CIT implemented into our department? And Officer Newkirchen was one of the first trainees. And he brought back this training with him that I found to be so valuable in these situations. And he was one of 4 that went through the training, but it wasn't a program yet. And he definitely was a driving force behind, let's turn this into something. So I was approached by the administration, and they said, would you like to be the sergeant of this program? We'll send you to the training, and then you can turn it into a program. And I said, fantastic, I would love to do that. So I think what really makes our department's CIT unique is that it really is functioning as its own unit. It is integrated with our patrol force, but it functions as its own unit. Whereas in other police departments, I think most other police departments, they have a smattering of officers who have this extra training, which is beneficial to the patrol force. But where we're really making our mark is performing in-depth follow-ups with the persons afflicted with mental illness and or their families as well. So generally, if a CIT officer is working on a regular shift and an incident gets called in that sounds like it has the indications of either a mental health issue or substance abuse issue, the CIT will volunteer to go and handle the call start to finish. If there is not a CIT officer on duty, a regular patrol officer will respond and resolve the situation to a degree, but we set up a system with the participation of all the other supervisors that all mental health and or substance abuse calls handled by regular patrolmen will be referred to me. I'll review those cases and I will assign a CIT officer to follow up within their 4-day work week. And they will respond and have a very in-depth interview with the person and or their family. And since you handle this in the field, I'm going to let you describe it.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on 2 really quick things, because I think if the viewers can take away anything, Sergeant Weihe just hit the nail on the head. You asked, how did it come about? Fairfield, once again, is, and I'm not saying this because he's ultimately my boss, because police officers, you will find, can be very critical of their chiefs of police.
But we have a pretty good one.
Well, Chief McNamara is extremely progressive in his thinking.
Yeah.
He's very practical and logical, and he has a pulse on the community like really nobody else. And when you're smart, and when you have a vision, and you have determination, and you also network very well, like Chief McNamara, you turn your department into a very progressive police department.
Yeah.
Towns call on us all the time.
Oh, really?
We were called on for our hostage negotiating team, which I was a part of when there was a standoff in Stamford about 1.5 years ago.
Because no towns between here and Stamford have a hostage
negotiation?
Well,
we have our team at the time, it was actually in Newkirchen on the Stamford border. And our team, we got trained by the FBI. We went away for a full week, which is probably another show, and trained by special agents from the FBI on how to handle hostage negotiating situations. We have a dive team that's constantly called out to other towns. We have, the new boat with the side scanning sonar and everything. So Fairfield has really gathered.
Don't forget Eagle One.
And Eagle One.
If you know my background, I'm an Eagle One advocate. So.
Eagle One. But Fairfield really has turned into a police department that's very progressive. We try a lot of new things, which I think is very good for the town. And also, Chief McNamara, I think like a lot of senior officers, approach the town in a way with the department like it's almost like no different than running a business. You have to understand your consumer base and what are the needs of the consumer. And in this case, it's what is the citizens.
Right.
Law enforcement is not like it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, even 2 years ago, with cyber crimes and everything. And now we're having much more of a high incident of people with emotional problems that are dealing with the police. Chief McNamara stood back and said, okay, where are the volume of calls? Where is the greatest need? Should we turn off maybe a couple of programs that we started 25 years ago that we don't need anymore and reinvest our resources into these new areas?
Which you really have to do with the changing technology.
Right, but I think that's the challenge of a lot of police chiefs who grew up within an organization and may kind of be a little set in their ways. Not mentioning any town specifically, but you kind of get that feedback. Even if you're not in law enforcement, you kind of understand that there's certain chiefs of police who've been there forever, and they're set in their ways, and they do a fantastic job. However, we're fortunate that we have someone that is a little more willing to take some risk for the benefit of the public, and I think that's really super important. The other thing I wanted to touch on are the follow-ups that we're doing. These field follow-ups 2 or 3 days later are huge for several reasons. Think about it, when you respond to a call and you're dealing with someone who's in crisis, if they've attempted suicide, they may not be coherent. They can't tell you what's really wrong. Why are they sad or why are they upset? Or if they've consumed a lot of alcohol, they can't respond to you. So that's why it's important. Secondly, you have a lot of family members who may physically try and fight the police because they fear that their loved one is going to be arrested, or they may purposely hide key information about the emotional background of the individual who maybe is waving the knife that we're trying to help. So once things have kind of calmed down, we can go back 2 or 3 days later and really get much more of an in-depth view as to what is going on with this individual. And ultimately, we use that information for the future, that if we have to go to that residence, officers who are not CIT trained can get alerts on their computer and do that much more of a better job when they do arrive on scene.
Because you now have a background on that family.
So a lot of it is also information dissemination, which is key and critical.
And I was just wondering, I wanted to sort of loop back quickly on before this program existed, and I guess you said you were the first.
I was the first
first to go and get the training.
Correct.
And I'm just wondering if at that time it was just an opportunity for more training and to branch into this, or did you see a real changing need in this community for this type of service?
I think that, and I'm not giving myself any false praise, if you talk to any of the 108 officers and ask them, where do you think we need more of a focus? They will tell you it's in the area of mental health and high incident calls where people are suffering and in crisis. There are times where 75% of our calls, if we get 25 calls in one night, sometimes 17 or 18 of them are these types of calls, where we may get like 2 or 3 accidents we may respond to. So looking at the broad spectrum, any officer on the road who's listening to the radio knows that these calls are just becoming more and more profound and with a higher frequency.
And why is that happening? Is that happening because of the economy?
I think it's a number of things. I think that when you think about it, you didn't have like things like, I'm going to throw this out, like Match.com or the internet, where people who are in a marriage and they're unhappy can so readily, easily get involved in situations they probably should not be getting themselves involved in. So I think technology is part of it. I think a new thing we're seeing is prescription drug abuse, and we've had some high-profile cases in this town where extremely wealthy, well-off, smart people, executives who have had it together for 30, 40, 50 years are suddenly putting on disguises and, hat and sunglasses and going into CVS and trying to get prescription drugs. So I think that is part of it. I think a lot of it has to do with the economy. I think a lot of it has to do with the pressures that we all face, particularly in Fairfield. I mean, it's a pretty competitive town. Everybody wants to go to a good school and a good college, and they want to make their parents happy. So I think it's those 3 or 4 or 5 things, coupled with, I think, the advancements in medical science that truly are making this really kind of come to the forefront. And as Sergeant Weihe has explained, these individuals are 7 to 11 times more likely to encounter the police than the average person walking down the street.
Which makes all the sense why we need to have you ready to engage them.
Sure,
and Sergeant Weihe, you had mentioned, so you're the sort of administrative officer that gets these cases directed to them. And so talk a little bit about what you do and what types of services are out there because you do a follow-up. You assign someone from your team to do a follow-up, but then you're really focused on linking people with services.
Absolutely. Another very unique thing about the Fairfield Police CIT program is that we have taken that next step and we have formed close personal relationships with clinicians and social workers that are the next step, the outside agency that we then refer to. We have a CIT liaison from the Greater Bridgeport Community Mental Health Center that actually comes and once a week or once every other week will ride along with one of our patrol officers, one of our CIT officers, and will perform her follow-ups in the presence of one of our CITs, which is great training for us as well.
Right.
But it's that close personal relationship that I think has really allowed us to connect those living with mental health, either themselves or their family, with the resources that they need. Part of the CIT officer follow-up is to provide phone numbers or websites, information on all available resources. So it kind of enables that person to take the first step themselves. But the insurance plan is these close personal relationships we've made with clinicians and social workers that really ensures that connection.
And so I guess as a follow-up, I'm wondering, I know in my work, in the state government, we're trying to move to a system where we've got measurables so that we can say this program that we're running or that we're spending taxpayer dollars on, it's successful, and we know it's successful because we've set a mission for it and we're measuring its success. And I'm wondering, you've only been sort of up and running for not even a year, I guess. So I'm wondering if there's what you're seeing and the results of putting these trained officers out there. Obviously, you've got a lot of cases. Is there a way to measure or to be able to tangibly tell if that training is really getting at the grassroots and helping people?
That is a fantastic question. And the reason why is, my first answer is this. As far as numbers go, it is an almost impossible the success is impossible to quantify in numbers. It's more of a long-term process. If you can fast forward 10 years and look at where we were with issues of the mentally ill getting arrested instead of being connected with the resources that they need, the mentally ill getting injured in a confrontation with an officer getting injured in a confrontation with a mentally ill person due to lack of training, lack of recognition, lack of tools to respond,
or even
lack
other
of
people
resources,
in the public getting
and innocent
danger.
bystanders as well. That is when you're really going to start to be able to see it in numbers. But right now, the success stories for us is when Officer Newkirchen goes on a follow-up and sits down with a mental health patient or their family and has a 30-minute conversation with them, a very in-depth interview, shows the care and consideration, and is able to connect them with resources. And at the end of that interview, that person or their family says, I never expected a police officer to be so caring. I never expected a police officer to be that interested and to be able to really connect us with the help that we've been yearning for all this time and we couldn't get. That is the immediate success to us.
It's also interesting to me because it's almost sometimes in government and the police force, I count in this, sometimes things are so obvious that your program so obviously could help people right at the grassroots level because you can meet them right there, and it seems like a natural thing to have the training, the police officer to have the training, and like you said, it's just great that so many. Now, what percentage? You said 20
I think the department would like to have 20% trained.
Okay.
Right now we have 12 trained CIT members.
Which is, even that is
It's
fantastic.
a great number. It really is.
And one of the sort of takeaways for anybody who decides to watch us on Fair TV would be that, it's not just our crisis intervention team that is reaching out into the community, but if even a resident in Fairfield witnesses something or suspects that they're witnessing an event with drugs or alcohol or mental health issues, that they can call in, and when they call in, they can, on the 911 call, they can ask for a CIT team member,
Anyone
or they can
request,
alert,
absolutely.
so that maybe that gets you to the scene more quickly.
And they can remain anonymous as well. Listen, I have to live in this neighborhood.
Right.
My next door neighbor, he's exhibiting some strange behavior. I don't want to give my name.
Right.
And that's also a very important point as well. We will not divulge that information if you call us and you want to remain anonymous.
Absolutely, very important. And so I certainly hope that those of you in Fairfield will take advantage of this extraordinary program and look for these two guys and the 12 or so officers that are out on our streets that are doing incredible work and reaching out to our families in crisis. I can't thank you enough for taking the initiative to bring this program to Fairfield and for sharing the information today. I'm really, really just, like I said in the beginning of the show, just always so impressed of what's going on with behind the scenes and in our town. And thanks again for watching an episode of Our Town. I hope you'll join us again next month when I have Carlo Miklos from the Executive Director of Operation Hope. We'll see you next time.